What's up, everyone? Dr. Jacob Wilson here. It's Wednesday, middle of the week. We're all excited, right? We're going to talk about some real interesting stuff today. I'm actually going to open it up by talking about intermittent fasting. You know, last week we talked about Manny and Darla, and we talked about how we put Manny on a ketogenic diet, Darla on a ketogenic diet, and how successful it was. Now, another technique besides ketogenic dieting that you can use to get really lean is intermittent fasting, right? So Fernando, who's filming this right now and making this video actually look really cool, actually become a really cool production, is intermittent fasting right now. So, and he looks actually even a lot leaner. How long have you been intermittent fasting now?
3 weeks now.
See, I was like talking to him, I was like, damn, Fernando's looking lean at AF. There you go. He's been intermittent fasting in the last 3 weeks. He looks leaner, like he's glowing, all that stuff. And a lot of that's the intermittent fasting. So when you talk about intermittent fasting, first off, what is it? Well, it's really time-restricted eating, okay? So what you're doing is, you know, like last night, I went downstairs at like 11 at night and had some dessert, right? That probably wouldn't fly in intermittent fasting, right? So the thing about intermittent fasting is you're restricting your time. So the common ones, a very simple one to start is like a 12-hour eating period, right? So let's say that if you woke up at 8 and you start eating, you'd stop at 8 at night, okay? And if I was doing that yesterday, for example, I probably wouldn't eat that cheesecake at 11, okay? So that's kind of the point. So that is what I would call more of a maintenance intermittent fasting schedule, is a 12-hour one. When you're talking about starting to lose body fat, then you're talking about probably restricting your eating period to 8 to 9 hours, okay? So in this case, let's say it's 9 hours. Let's say, Fernando, when do you start eating?
I start eating at 1 o'clock.
So say Fernando starts eating at 1, say he's doing an 8-hour feeding period, then he would be done at 9 at night, right? So that's a really good way to lose fat, okay? Then if you're trying to lose more fat, a very strict way is a 4-hour feeding period. So you might, one of the researchers here, his name's Country, he's been doing research with me now for probably 6 years, 5-6 years. But what he does is when he's trying to get really cut, he does a 4-hour window. So you might start eating at 5 and stop eating at 9, okay? So what you have here is 12 hours, which is more maintenance. It kind of keeps you strict. You talk about an 8-hour feeding period, which I think is good for fat loss, and then an extreme 4-hour period, which is really fast, rapid fat loss. Now, pluses and minuses of each. I think when you're talking about, one, it keeps your calories in check. Intermittent fasting keeps your calories in check. 2, it makes you more insulin sensitive, okay? So I think this is really important stuff to talk about. And 3, actually, studies show when you're bulking, you don't gain as much fat. So let's say that someone's like bulking, they're trying to put on size. If they restrict their feeding period, you actually don't gain as much fat. It's probably because it keeps you more insulin sensitive. So when we look at pluses and minuses, like I said, 12 hours more like a maintenance, 8 hours is more like fat loss, 4 hours is accelerated fat loss. Then why not do the 4? Well, the thing is that when you're doing that 4-hour period, it's going to be almost impossible to gain muscle. When you're doing the 8 to 9 hour feeding period, you can still gain muscle. You may not optimize muscle mass, but you can still make lean gains. So like that middle one's probably good for lean gains. Now, what my parents do, for example, is when say that they're trying to get super lean, okay, then what they'll do is they'll calorie cycle. So what they might do is 2 days, so they might do, like, for example, 2 days or 3 days, they might do an 8-hour fast, an 8-hour feeding period. 2 days they'll go super hardcore, 4-hour feeding period, and on the weekends, 12 hours. So they'll eat breakfast on the weekends. And what this does is it produces a calorie cycling effect. Studies show that when you calorie cycle, you actually keep your metabolism elevated longer and you lose more long-term fat. And you keep your metabolism elevated. So summarize this up: intermittent fasting, you're restricting your feeding period to 4, 8, 12 hours. 12 is good for maintenance, 8 and 4 is good for losing fat. If you do 4, it's going to be very hard to gain muscle. I suggest never doing straight 4 because it'll probably lower your metabolism. So do it in a cyclic fashion, 4, 8, 12. So guys, that is that topic, and we can get into some questions.
So really our first question built off of that pretty well. What are your thoughts on water fasts?
So I think when you're intermittent fasting, drinking water during that period is fine. I think that that's during an intermittent fast. If you're talking about doing it on an extended period of time for body composition purposes, you will lose muscle if you're fasting for 24 hours. So there's been studies that have done like, I'm going to do a water fast for 24 hours versus what I would call like a protein sparing modified fast. When they do they'll do what's called every other day fasting. I do a water fast for 24 hours, then I eat for 24 hours, I eat in that time period. Then I water fast for 24 hours off and on. You lose a lot of muscle doing that, whereas the protein sparing modified fast, where like every other day you're eating like 500 calories, but it's high protein and protein sparing, that's probably better for body composition and not making your metabolism plummet. But if you're doing the water fast in an intermittent window and it's not 24 hours, sure, I think that's fine. But even then, I think a superior way to do that is more of a modified. So like Fernando, probably do you do straight water or modified?
I do modified.
Like what do you do in the modified period?
I usually just have coffee in the morning,
So
and then just BCAAs throughout.
So what he's doing is a protein sparing energy modified fast. So he's taking BCAAs, it's making sure he's not losing muscle during the fasting window, and have a little bit of coffee, which actually will keep his energy high, it'll keep his mind off of food, and the fatty acids might actually help spare muscle. So you can do that modified version, which could be better cognitively than the water fast. But if you can handle water, that's fine too.
Can we build muscle in a calorie deficit?
You can definitely build muscle in a calorie deficit. There's tons of studies that show that. I remember when I was actually coming up, people said it was impossible to lose fat and gain muscle at the same time. Well, guys, there's more than enough studies to show you can. What I will tell you is that that's easier said than done when you first start dieting. If you get down to your single digits body fat, it becomes very difficult to gain muscle and lose fat at the same time, unless you're like Lawrence Ballinger. He's probably going to lose fat he's probably going to put on 30 pounds of muscle and probably lose fat during that time period. So, but for the most part, when you're super lean, it becomes very difficult, but it is possible.
What would you recommend for a macronutrient ratio in your first meal after a fast?
I think the biggest thing when you come out of a fast is you need to get yourself back into building muscle. So I actually tend to go higher protein in that first meal. So you might go 50% protein. One thing I will tell you is that your first meal of the day, no matter what it is, programs your metabolism the rest of the day. So typically coming out of a fast, I recommend low carb, even if you have higher carbs later. So get your metabolism sped up, maybe have like 50% protein, and the rest of your calories are going to come from more fat, maybe 5 to 10% carbohydrate. It's kind of almost extend the fasting a little bit metabolically. And then if you're going to have carbs, have it your next meal.
What are your thoughts on the OMAD or 1 meal a day diet?
I think the 1 meal a day diet's kind of like puts you in that 4-hour feeding period, except it restricts it even more. You're kind of in a 1-hour feeding period. Look, it's definitely a way to lose a lot of fat, but if you do it every single day, your metabolism's going to definitely slow. So if you're going to do the OMAD, I would cycle it 1 to 2 times a week max.
So when you eat fat and protein together, how much fat will you have to eat to actually slow down the absorption or digestion of the protein?
So, listen, I think bottom line is as soon as you start getting past 20 to 30 grams of fat, you're going to slow down the digestion of protein quite substantially. So I would say probably past the 20 to 30 gram mark.
What are your thoughts on gaining muscle on keto versus gaining muscle on carbs?
Okay.
Or a carb-friendly diet.
Okay, so what I'm going to tell you is this. I'm going to tell you from a science standpoint. I can tell you from a personal standpoint. From a scientific perspective, okay? We've done studies, and what we did a study, I think it got published back in 2015, maybe 2016, Journal of Strength Conditioning Research. We found that guys on a ketogenic diet could gain just as much muscle and gain just as much strength on a ketogenic diet. Now, when that paper came out, we got attacked by everybody because everyone said it was impossible. They attacked us. They attacked our lab. Since then, there's been probably at least 6, 7 other studies that have shown the same exact thing that we found. So you can definitely gain as much muscle on a ketogenic diet when volume controlled as you can a carbohydrate diet. Now, from a personal standpoint, I can tell you that when I was having carbohydrates, even a small amount, my training volume was able to be so much higher. That's just me personally. When I was mentally, it was much easier for me to train for 2 hours when I was on a carb diet than keto. Okay, so but if you're doing the same training volume, meaning you're doing the same amount of sets, it's lifting the same amount of weight, you're going to gain the same amount of muscle. Mentally, for me, it was like great. So one thing that a good friend of mine, Jordan Joy, did is he did a study looking at targeted ketogenic dieting, and that's when you have a few carbs, some like 20, 30 grams of carbs just around the workout. And he found they lost just as much fat on a ketogenic diet, and they gained just as much muscle and strength. So I think if you are like me and you were able to train higher volume mentally on a carb diet, then maybe targeted ketogenic diet might be a better approach for you. But it is what it is.
For hard gainers, do you recommend full body workouts or body part split workouts?
For hard gainers, I would probably recommend probably if you're a hard gainer, you might need to pound the muscle that much more. And so probably split workouts work really well. However, you can train more frequently with full body workouts. So in that case, I'd say a combination of both. Maybe you switch it up. Maybe you do full body workouts where you can get more frequency, but your volume is going to be lower. And when you adapt to that, switch to single or maybe 2 body parts at one time, but higher volume. When you plateau that, go back to either upper, lower, or full, higher frequency.
How often do you recommend a diet break, and how long should you do your diet break for?
So I recommend calorie cycling every single week. So if you're dieting down, 2 days a week should be a diet break. So in other words, like you should, if you're dieting Monday through Friday, on the weekends probably go back up to maintenance. Or what I would do when I was dieting is I would go 2 low calories, 1 moderate calorie day, 1 slightly above maintenance day, and then I would go low, moderate, slightly above maintenance. So you should program in breaks every single week, okay? But I would say probably after dieting hard for 4 to 6 weeks, give yourself 2 weeks at maintenance, because then you're going to really start to plateau.
When you're doing intermittent fasting, when should you place your workout throughout the day?
In a perfect world, you should probably place your workout, if it's a resistance training workout, at the time you break the fast, right around that time, either right before you break the fast or right before you're going to break the fast, or in a time period that's after you've broken the fast.
Here's an interesting one. What role do cytokines play in muscle hypertrophy?
You know, cytokines play actually a big role in muscle hypertrophy. So cytokines mediate a lot of the inflammatory response that we have. So I remember people who, you get an inflammatory cytokine response, okay? Cytokines are these messengers, these inflammatory messengers. You have pro-inflammatory, right? You have anti-inflammatory. You have some that have dual roles. And we're actually, to be honest with you, we actually just got invited to submit a paper to a journal, and it's a special issue on cytokines. And so our director of research, Matt Sharp, is working on that paper right now. But we think that that cytokines kind of tie the immune system in with the resistance training response. So, for example, if you blunt the cytokine response, that inflammatory cytokine response with, say, things like ibuprofen or any NSAID, non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, right? If any NSAIDs, or like I said, ibuprofen, Advil, if you have that around the workout, you kind of dampen the cytokine response and you gain less muscle. Now, so that there's only one time actually that doesn't happen. When you're older and you have a ton of inflammation, actually taking ibuprofen around training can help you gain muscle. Now, I'm not telling you take that every workout because there's problems with that, okay? Which destroy your liver, right? But they've done studies on that, and because they had too much of a cytokine response, right? So, and of course, we know with the whole pandemic that too much of the cytokine response is probably not good. You have a storm, but the moderate response that you get with training could actually be good for gaining muscle.
How much omega-3s do you need per day?
So I like looking at the omega-3s are essential fatty acids. You get omega-3s from fish. You get them from fish oil tablets. You can also get them from things like flax. But from meat-based products, they seem to be ideal. So you want to look at the back of a label, or if you can look at you look at the back of a label and you look at something called EPA and DHA. Those are two of the main omega-3s that you want, DHA and EPA. Make sure you get about 3 grams a day of that total for optimal omega-3 function.
Is L-carnitine beneficial for fat loss?
That's a really great question. Is L-carnitine beneficial for fat loss? That's a controversial question. I don't think L-carnitine is going to get you shredded, but I think L-carnitine helps you as a really good recovery agent. So the theory on L-carnitine is L-carnitine gets in the muscle, it helps transport fatty acids into the mitochondria, you burn them and you get shredded. It's a really good theory. I don't think there's a ton of data on it being like a great fat burner, but I will say this, it does seem to be really good for optimizing recovery. And if you can recover faster, you can train more frequently, which could be good for fat loss.
Is hyperplasia a real thing?
Hyperplasia is definitely, I would say, as far as you can point to, I'd say it's definitely a real thing. Hypertrophy is when a muscle fiber grows. Hyperplasia, you create new muscle fibers. Let me say this. You cannot look at IFBB pro bodybuilders and tell me they have not had hyperplasia, okay? So, but the thing about it is that hyperplasia means when you create new muscle fibers, when you create a more anabolic environment, okay, meaning if you're taking anabolic agents, I think that you're training hardcore and heavy, I think you can definitely create hyperplasia. If you're not, then the only ways that I think that you really create hyperplasia are extreme training, where you're causing like force negatives, where you're causing ridiculous amounts of muscle damage towards hard to move for days, that could stimulate hyperplasia. And also, but remember, just obviously be careful that you need to be advanced. And there may be some evidence to where when someone has reached a point where they've maxed out muscle growth for them, and then they start training extreme, and their body can't adapt by gaining new muscle fibers, by gaining new muscle size with the fibers they have, then you gain new muscle fibers. So I do think hyperplasia can occur, but I think you need to have been training a long time to where you're near a plateau, and that you're training at extreme levels. Or training extreme levels in general may initiate hyperplasia.
How can you jumpstart your metabolism during a stall period in a diet?
You can jumpstart your metabolism during a stall period in your diet by upping protein to high levels. Protein's very thermogenic. So basically, as crazy as it sounds, but if you up your protein to 2 grams per pound of body weight, even if you're keeping your calories consistent, that might jumpstart your metabolism. Also, I think raising your calories up is a good way to jumpstart your calories. And the problem is, say you've been dieting a long time, you can't lose any more fat. When you raise your calories back up, you gain a lot of fat. So you're like, oh, what's the point? But if you raise your calories with protein, it's hard to gain fat with protein. So if you can do that for like 2 weeks, or eating a whole bunch of protein for like 2 weeks, so you're kind of getting hot, because that's such a thermic effect. That's a way to jumpstart your metabolism. Then go back to your normal dieting, you'll be cool.
Does finasteride affect muscle gain?
I mean, yeah, finasteride will affect muscle gain, but I'm trying to think how many. I'm trying to think of the research on that one.
I'm drawing a blank.
You know what? I don't know of a lot of studies that have been done with that on muscle gain, so we'll take a rain check on that. I don't know how many studies have been done on what. Do you know any studies have been done on that?
I can't think of anything.
Yeah. No.
What's the mechanism of action with it?
I'm trying to think of
drawing a blank
how.
on it completely.
I'm trying to think of how it actually target a mechanism that would actually make you grow.
Right.
So right now I'm gonna take a rain check on that because I can't think of a mechanism of how it would make you grow.
Or make you not grow.
Or make you not grow.
Right. Can we build muscle without progressive overload?
So it depends on like how you're defining like progressive overload. If you're defining traditional progressive overload as I'm going to up the weight every time I lift weights. In other words, I need to put more weight on the bar every time I lift. And you're saying that because there's different ways of progressive overload. If you're saying like I'm just adding weight to the bar, are there other ways to gain muscle besides that? The answer is yes. You can increase your training volume. If you're saying progressive overload is period, increasing my training volume meaning sets, reps, adding weight to the bar, and you're saying I'm not doing that at all. I'm not doing that at all. Is there a way to gain muscle besides increasing total volume and increasing total load per set? The answer is yes, you can. Blood flow restriction training is a way to do that. Changing the exercise selection up is a way to do it. So in other words, let's say you've hit a point where like, I can't increase my volume anymore. I can't add more weight to the bar. Cool, then use other techniques. Change up the exercises that you're doing. That will make you gain muscle. Blood flow restriction, that'll make you gain muscle. So now you change the environment and the methods that you're using. That's a way to gain muscle technically without progressive overload, right? It's just you're changing the methods instead of the volume.
What are your thoughts on protein cycling to increase protein sensitivity?
So there's research, it never got published, right? But there was research that actually, I saw it at an ACSM conference. And it showed that when I up my protein intake, I increased the enzymes that break the protein down. And that study showed that when you increase protein intake, it did increase like protein synthesis and anabolism or muscle growth, but you started increasing the enzymes that break protein down. So what that tells me is that, so say I'm eating a gram per pound of protein and I go to 1.5 and I get a muscle building response out of it, I'll build a bunch of enzymes and that'll be 1.5 will be status quo. So you don't really want to hit that point. So I think you should protein cycle to do that. So maybe on your hardest workout days of the week, bump your protein up. And then in your normal workouts, just have it at lower. That you're protein cycling and your body never adapts by upregulating enzymes.
I think this is a good one to probably end with. We've talked a lot about metabolism today. Should you use different supplements or methods to increase metabolism in older age, like say 50s and beyond?
So I think that's a great question. The golden ticket has always been supplements that raise your metabolism, right? And what the problem is, most supplements that raise your metabolism do so temporarily. Caffeine does it temporarily, right? Even the hardcore stuff like ephedra does it temporarily, right? All these offshoots that basically mimicking the sympathetic nervous system, do it temporarily. So what is really the core of your metabolism? A lot of it's muscle mass, right? A lot of it is novelty and activity that raise your metabolism. As we get older, we start to lose muscle. So I think more as you get older, the best way to impact your metabolism is to keep focusing on gaining muscle. That's one of the best ways. And the other thing is changing things up. So we become efficient at any movement that we do. So studies show, in fact, if you look, for example, take running economy. When I'm running, the longer I run and the more years I run, the less calories I burn running. So what I would say is, as you get older, you need to change your exercise selection up more, because if you're in your 50s or 60s or 70s, you might have been training for years, and if you're doing the same thing every time, of course you're not getting a metabolic response about it, because you're so freaking efficient at doing it. You need to change all your exercises up. So change your exercise selection up, and focusing on muscle building supplements is probably the best thing for your metabolism. So guys, thank you so much. I really appreciate you tuning in, and I'll see you next week at this time.